my conscience is clear in terms of I was playing a role, he'd been passed to be on the show, and I did the part to the best of my ability.
It's been quite the week for you and a pretty horrific 5.5 years for everyone involved in this situation. Yesterday you got vindication. The coroner ruled that there was not a causal effect from the show or from you yourself. How do you feel given everything that's happened? What's the last 24 hours been like for you?
You know what I think my first reaction was, as it was 5.5 years ago? Let's not forget this was tragedy. Somebody took their life because they were in a position where they saw no way out. And that, for me, was the first thing. I haven't spoken for 5.5 years because there was a legal process that dragged on and on for many reasons. COVID, people, whatever. And I always wanted to have my say, and I always wanted to be honest, because Steve Dymond sadly took his own life. But I also, that was my first thought. And from that, you know, you build, don't you?
Did it feel like vindication for you, or, as you say, have you just not been able to think about you at the moment?
I don't think it's about me. I thought lots of things. I thought about him, thought about his family. I thought about the 100 kids that worked for me that lost their jobs overnight. Some of them had their mortgages cancelled. I remember at the time just being in this bubble of not even understanding what had happened, but I get it. I get it from ITV's point of view. The world is a very different place. But I was determined to eventually have my say and say that it's important that the world might have changed, but that show at that time was very successful and it did a lot of good. It put a lot of people into detox and rehab. It put a lot of people in the knowledge of who their parents were. And what happened was a tragedy for Steve Dymond and his family. But I felt it wrong that everybody piled in, journalists, members of wherever, and had their judgment seemingly on me and the show. And there was much more to the story. And I think in Steve's memory, that needed to come out.
Going back 5.5 years, can you remember where you were when you found out that Steve Dymond had taken his own life, and what your reaction and how you felt at the time?
I went to the office on the morning, I think, of the 9th, the Friday, and I was sat in my dressing room and somebody came in and told me, and you just think, wow. Filming was cancelled, went home, and I never went back to Manchester. And you know, you spend that weekend thinking, geez. And actually everything then about the show is pointless, because you think about this guy being in that position.
Was there a part of you that automatically blamed yourself, because that's a human thing to do, I think? And
I think in that moment, I think everybody was so shocked that you think, God, of course there's been plenty of times over the last 5.5 years, but I knew in my heart, and I did a lot of parts, when I saw the 11 minutes, I mean, when I read, you know, as I said to you earlier, towering over him and shouting and called him a traitor. No, I didn't. I didn't ask the audience to boo him at all. I said to them at the end, give him a round of applause for being brave enough to come on. Some of those accusations were so wrong, but listen, I said it in court. I know that I did that show to the best of my ability. I'm sure I didn't get it right the whole time. I looked at the Steve Dymond clips and I thought, I said, hello mate, hello pal, made a joke with him, gave him the results, was very straight with him, took him backstage, tried to de-escalate it, said, we'll take you away and sit you down, and said, listen mate, I remember saying to him, and I remembered this, she loves you, you don't need to lie, tell her the truth, we'll put you together. So yeah, in that, I went through that thinking about all those things, because immediately you think, did I do it?
Are you sorry for any part as a presenter of this TV show that you had in the death of Steve Dymond?
I think everybody would be sorry, whoever they are that's associated with the tragedy that happened, that Steve Dymond took his own life. But as I said in court, and I say again to you, my conscience is clear in terms of I was playing a role, he'd been passed to be on the show, and I did the part to the best of my ability. I think if you look at yesterday's judgment, and the coroner took 5.5 years and he went through absolutely everything, and I repeat what he found, which was myself and the Jeremy Carr show didn't cause or contribute to Steve Dymond's death, and that for me is the important thing to say.
And do you have a message today for his family?
like I said 5.5 years ago, my thoughts were with them. It was a tragedy. And I think, I mean, yesterday was International Suicide Awareness Day. And I've said it forever. For anybody to be in that position is a horrible position. And we as a society should do everything we can to help that. But to blame other people is, I think, wrong. I think we should look at the central reason of a man or a woman in any case that gets to a point that they're that desperate. And that's why I guess it's taken as long as it has.
Yeah, and in your statement yesterday, you talked about the impact this has had on not only you, but your family as well. Can you expand on that? In what way has this...
It's really difficult, Clemmie, because I remember doing an interview a couple of years ago, or actually I think I was on Talk, and I talked about how it affected me. And for 3 months, I couldn't get out of bed. Everything that I'd ever known had been taken away. And in hindsight, I understand. But nobody wants to hear about the television presenter who has a breakdown and gets given antidepressants and thinks, me? That's ridiculous. That's fine, I get that. I think mental health, I think one of the things that came out of all of this was a look at television in general and the ability for people to talk more. But that has to be across the scale. And, you know, when I say, yes, it was hard for me, people will go, it's all right for him because he's on the television. But my wife saved me. I never, ever, ever could envisage being where Steve was. But I found it difficult. Yeah. And I think that's part of it. Yeah, it was hard.
And you said before you were diagnosed with anxiety. Did you get diagnosed with depression at any time? Were you on medication?
Citalopram.
Were you not sleeping?
Couldn't do anything.
Were you on Zopiclone, Zopidem, you know, sleeping pills? How did...
No, I don't sleep. And listen, I've slept 4 hours a night. I can consider myself a bit weird like that anyway for however many years.
Is there anything that you feel that you really want to address that you've not been able to? Have you felt silence at any stage in this process?
I think I felt silence for the whole 5.5 years because my frustration was, actually out of respect for Steve and the process, was I wish we could do this sooner. I've said privately and I'll say publicly, I think the process took far too long. I think it was blown up into something that it didn't have to be blown up into. And people then get associated with that and dragged into it. I mean, the legal bill will be in millions for all sides. Did
you get any abuse in the street? Or was it just...
I can honestly, categorically tell you that in 5.5 years, I've never been abused in the street. Wow. From aeroplanes to trains to anything. Yeah.
Well, I think that's because 1.3 million people every day were tuning into the show. It was ITV's most popular.
Who have never, ever gone back to television.
Sorry?
They've never gone back to watching television in the morning, those people.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you get into the wider argument about the show. Did it shine a light on a part of society that the bedwetters, as I now call them on Talk, found difficult to look at? Yeah.
Well, there was, you look like someone that was on the Jeremy Kyle show, became a byword for someone of a sort of underclass of British society. As you know, it was chav culture. There was another term that was bandied about then. And you were at the sort of heart of that. And sort of looking back at that now, how does that make you feel? And do you think that we have a sort of voyeurish public getting some
your article the other day brings it back, because everybody piles on Twitter. It was a different time. I completely accept that. And people, you know, it was conflict resolution. I kept saying when I was giving evidence last week, because, you know, the family's lawyers wanted me to, they kept saying, but it was belittling, it was, and I kept saying, certainly look at that footage, but the show was conflict resolution. And from the person that came on and asked for the results, and you do it, and if you needed to tell a home truth, you did. And the people that came on the show, over 30,000 of them, they were far more switched on than many of the people who tune in and make their criticisms. Somebody once said to me, it's cooler being on Kyle, I've got more street cred than getting an ASBO. And I remember thinking, wow. But alongside that, don't forget it's a television show, it's conflict resolution. We had aftercare that nobody had ever even contemplated, by the way. And we did it, you know, in my mind, second to none. And I said it in court. The reason Steve Dymond was turned down the first time he applied was because he was on antidepressants. And the team quite rightly said no. And he was sent away, and he went to his doctor, and 6 weeks later, he came back with the doctor's note saying he was cleared to go on.
And of course, last week, when you gave your sort of evidence, you made the point you were just the presenter. You, I presume, weren't aware of someone appearing on the show's medical notes. You weren't aware of their history.
I would only be if they'd been passed. But you know, I had to make that point. I was the presenter, and I had my name on the show. I would venture to suggest that if I hadn't had my name on the show, and I wasn't that target, it might have been different. But I didn't process, I didn't select, I didn't aftercare before, during, and after. You know, I met tragic Steve Dymond for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I read all these, you know, you bullied him and you called him a traitor. No, I didn't. Look at the footage. It's actually very pleasant when he walked on.
Was it hard watching those back? Was it strange? Was it an out-of-body experience almost?
No, because I remembered, I mean, I've been with the lawyers, I'd been watching it. The first time I saw it was awful. But then I watched it and I thought, I didn't shout and scream at him. I wasn't cowering over him. I took him backstage and calmed it down and sat him down. And, you know, I mean,
Did you talk to him in the green room before or after? Can you remember?
I never talked to guests before because that wouldn't have been right. So I'd be on stage, they'd bring them out, I'd get a note pack. But if you watch those clips, despite what people said, I tried to de-escalate it and said to them, we'll turn the cameras off and get you two together.
When you got back that night, did you think again about him or did you just think about the next show?
And that's a great question, and you have to be honest with the answer. It's a bit like, and I said this in court and I think people were like that, there were 100 people that worked on that show. So when you're given somebody and you do your piece, and then there's an aftercare team. And I saw people raise their eyes when I said this in court last week. The Steve Dymond part was a pretty calm, typical Jeremy Kyle part. I don't want to criticise him or his family. I'm not going to do that. But I believe that we did the part that we were begged to do. Steve phoned the show between 40 and 50 times. Mm-hmm. His doctor gave us a letter saying he was fine to appear, and we did the job. And, you know, it's also, I mean, people when they came on the show had 2 people to vouch for them. So 2 people vouched for Steve Dymond, 2 for his 2 other family members. That was 6 people. They didn't raise anything either. So, yes, of course, it was awful when we found out, for everybody. It's the first thing I said. But as the months turned, the days turned into weeks, into months, into years, it was all about the style of me or the show. Yeah. Steve Dymond, bless him, had problems. And in hindsight, if anybody had known the extent of those problems, he wouldn't have been on the show, but that was concealed. And that's a really important point.
Absolutely. And do you think, this is a hard question, but do you think he would have taken his own life regardless of had he appeared on your show?
I have no idea. And I wouldn't ever, I've said at the beginning, the thought of being in that position, I've been 10% of that, right? And that was pretty awful. So I have real sympathy for anybody that would do that. And the people that know me know that.
I think that's with suicide, and I'm sure a lot of people have got experience from a family member, a friend or something. There is never just one causal element. There is a multitude of factors at play. And to blame one person, had it been called the ITV chat show, perhaps you wouldn't have been waiting 5.5 years. You were the very public face of a very, very successful...
And I get that, and I get that. And, like I said to you earlier, I think with that, you have to take it. And I took it for 15 years, and I gave it for 15 years, so that's fine. But the extent of it, and then not being able to respond, was hard.
I want to talk a little bit about ITV and the show. The Jeremy Kyle show, poverty porn.
Where did that come from?
Some commentator, some clever hack made that up. Not me.
Oh, I was going to say.
No, I don't think it was me. But is that something you would disagree with? I mean, there are other shows out there that were doing similar things.
I go back to probably, when did the show start? 2004, on my 40th birthday. It lasted to 2019. 15 years, I think in that time. You think of Benefit Street, you think of Don't Pay, We'll Take Away, you think of... I always had this belief that, yes, it was a vehicle of its time, and people loved it or they hated it. It was a bit like Marmite, and a lot of people watched it because it made them feel better about their own lives. Voyeuristic, absolutely. It was cult viewing, students. I mean, I'm that old, people say, when I was at university, I'm married now and divorced, we used to watch it. But it was a certain genre. But then television then went through, everybody wanted to revamp houses and cook recipes. That's what was on. It was Springer, it came, it started with Trisha Goddard. But, you know, I think when probably the Jeremy Kyle show, I mean, it would have ended anyway. Of course it would have ended. That's the world changed. Mobile phones, social media, all those sorts of things. So, poverty porn, I don't know. Listen, I will forever say it was conflict resolution. It was a raw journey. There were emotions left, right and centre. Some people were happy, some were sad, some were angry, some were desperate, some were delighted. It was, I guess, a programme of its time.
Yeah. Is there anyone to blame in this entire situation?
I'm not looking to do that. I could say, you know, no. Do you know what? No, because a very wise lady said to me yesterday, all of us only move forward if you don't have that on your shoulder anymore. There's no point in going, well, he said that and she said that, and if they'd done that, listen, I've been very fortunate to have great people around me who have dragged me through this. There are many other people who have suffered, but you know what? Bitterness, anger, resentment, revenge, that's rubbish. Victim, rubbish, just get on with it, just do it.
Are you to this day still proud of the work that you did in the show?
It's a really good question, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because I can sit here and say to you categorically that there will be thousands of people who benefited. Mm-hmm. There'll be some, I'm sure, who would go, oh, that was a bit harsh. There'll be others who loved it. It is what it was. The point that I wanted to say to people repeatedly is the show's gone, right? Yeah. It was a bygone era. At the time, it was the most popular daytime show in the history of British television. That's, you know, you look at that and then you look at what happened to Steve Dymond. Am I proud of it? Somebody said to me once, what will your legacy be? And I'm not even dodging your question. A father of 6 who managed to get through bringing 6 kids up and still manages to walk in a straight line.
And finally, do you just feel lighter in yourself now? Is this a relief?
I'm going to answer that and give you the only light-hearted answer of the day. I've lost 1.5 stone since I went and gave evidence a week ago, so I definitely feel lighter.